May 12, 1943. 600 miles southwest of Iceland, an RAF Liberator was flying low through broken cloud with 9 hours of ocean already behind it. Flight Lieutenant John Wright was at the controls. Then the radar operator called out a contact. Bearing 045, range 8 miles, Wright pushed the throttles forward and dropped lower. Through a gap in the cloud, he saw it at once. A German U-boat on the surface, recharging batteries in what should have been the safest part of its patrol. For one brief second, both sides understood the same thing. The aircraft had found the submarine before the submarine had finished its work. Then the U-boat began to dive. That was the old pattern. Aircraft appears. Submarine crashes under. Attack window closes, and usually the submarine survives. Wright knew how short the window really was. A U-boat caught on the surface could disappear in less than a minute. Men on the conning tower dropped below. The bow tilted. Water climbed over the hull. In another few seconds, the target would be gone, leaving only a swirl on the Atlantic and a guess about where to drop the attack. That was where the whole war at sea had been breaking down. Finding the submarine was not the hard part anymore. Killing it after it dived was. That was the fatal weakness in Allied anti-submarine warfare. The aircraft could spot the boat. Radar could get them over the target. Pilots could force the submarine under. But once it disappeared beneath the water, the weapon doing the actual killing was still the depth charge, and depth charges had a flaw so serious it shaped the entire battle of the Atlantic. They were blind. A pilot dropped them on where he thought the submarine would be, not where it was going. That difference killed men by the thousands. Depth charges fell straight down and exploded at preset depths. If the pilot judged correctly, the blast might crack the pressure hull, wreck machinery, or force the boat up damaged. But if the submarine captain changed depth, turned hard, or simply kept moving better than expected, the bombs burst in empty water. The attack looked violent. The sea churned. The aircraft crew saw foam and spray and believed they had done something. Then the Atlantic swallowed the evidence, and the U-boat slipped away. That was not a minor problem. It was the central problem. By 1942, German submarines had turned the Atlantic into a killing ground. Merchant ships carrying food, fuel, ammunition, tanks, and aircraft to Britain were going down faster than the Allies could replace them. Convoys were being mauled. Exports were stretched thin. The mid-Atlantic gap, too far for most land-based aircraft to cover, had become a hunting preserve where U-boats could attack with terrifying freedom. And every submarine captain knew the same tactical truth. If you got caught on the surface, diving was still your best defense, because once you went under, the attacker started guessing. That was the part Churchill feared most. Not just the submarines themselves, the logic behind them. A U-boat did not need to win a visible battle. It only had to survive the counterattack long enough to return tomorrow night and sink another convoy ship. That repeated survival kept the whole German submarine campaign alive. Depth charges, patrol aircraft, escort ships. None of it mattered enough if the final attack still left too much room for the target to escape. That was why the numbers were so ugly. Aircraft could force submarines down. They just could not finish them reliably. And a weapon that fails 9 times out of 10 teaches the enemy exactly how much confidence he can keep. The Germans built their tactics around that confidence. Once the aircraft appeared, the drill was immediate. Crash, dive, angle down, turn away from the expected attack line. Let the bombs fall where you no longer were. The ocean itself helped them. Water hid movement, sonar had limits. Aircraft had no underwater eyes. By the time the bombs reached lethal depth, the U-boat had often already traded one patch of sea for another. That was the dead zone, the moment between sighting and destruction where the submarine should have died, but usually did not. The Allies were losing too much inside that gap, and by early 1943, they knew it. This was no longer a question of bravery. Patrol crews already had that. They flew long hours through cold weather, bad visibility, and open ocean with the knowledge that if a U-boat's flak caught them low enough, the Atlantic would take them too. Escort sailors had courage too. So did merchant crews crossing under Wolfpack threat. The problem was not will. It was method. They had a war-winning need and a peacetime weapon trying to meet it. That mismatch was costing the Atlantic, so the real question became brutally simple. What kind of weapon kills a submarine after it has already disappeared? Not before. After. That was the leap. Not a bigger depth charge. Not a faster aircraft. Not better luck. A weapon that could enter the water and keep hunting after the submarine had gone under. That sounded impossible for good reason. Torpedoes of the era were built to run preset courses against surface ships. Depth charges exploded where they were told. Neither one solved the basic problem of a submerged target changing direction after the attack had already started. What the Allies needed was something stranger, something small enough to be dropped by aircraft, smart enough to keep searching underwater, and precise enough to follow a submarine after the crew inside thought they had escaped. In other words, they needed a weapon that did not go blind when the submarine dived. That idea was far more dangerous than it sounded, because if it worked, it would reverse the logic of the Atlantic. For years, diving had been the submarine's best answer. It turned exposure into concealment. It turned sighting into uncertainty. It let the hunted become hard to hit at exactly the right second. But if someone could build a weapon that followed a submarine down instead of losing it, then the safest move a U-boat had would stop being safety. It would become the trap. That was the true revolution behind the weapon the Allies were now carrying. It did not look revolutionary. Inside Wright's Liberator was a short, fat weapon that looked almost unimpressive compared with the larger torpedoes and bombs men were used to seeing. It was only 7 feet long, 19 inches in diameter. Stubby, heavy, awkward. Nothing about it suggested a glamorous breakthrough. That was part of the secret. Because the weapon's real power was not in how it looked, it was in what it could do after splashdown. It did not need a preset course. It did not need a visible wake for the enemy to track. It did not need the pilot to guess perfectly where the submarine would be in 30 seconds. It listened. That was the difference. Somewhere inside that compact body sat the answer to the dead zone that had been killing Allied crews and protecting German submarines. The aircraft only had to get it close. After that, the work passed into the water itself. The men inside the U-boat could no longer rely on depth, darkness, and maneuver alone. For the first time, there was now something that could follow them into the one environment that had always kept them alive, and that made it one of the most dangerous secrets of the war. So dangerous, in fact, that the Allies refused to call it what it really was. Not officially. Not in reports. Not in conversation outside the cleared circle. Because if the Germans learned the truth too early, if they understood that Allied aircraft were now dropping an acoustic torpedo that could hear propellers underwater and home in on them, the whole advantage might vanish. Countermeasures would come. Tactics would change. The miracle would become just another contest. So the weapon was hidden behind a false name, a harmless name, a misleading name. They called it a mine. And on the morning John Wright drove his Liberator down through Atlantic cloud toward a diving U-boat, the crew below had no reason to think the splash they were about to leave behind would be different from every other aerial attack they had survived. That was their mistake, because this time, once the submarine vanished under the surface, the real attack was only beginning. That was the idea the Allies had been missing. Not a bigger depth charge, not a faster bomber. A weapon that could enter the water, keep listening, and keep hunting after the submarine had already done the one thing that used to save it. The concept appeared before the weapon did. In late 1941, the Navy asked a question that sounded dangerously close to fantasy. Could a small airdrop torpedo be built to follow a submerged submarine by listening to the sound of its propellers? That question mattered because the normal logic of anti-submarine war had run out of room. Surface attack drove the U-boat under. Depth charges guessed. The submarine escaped. If the Allies wanted to break that cycle, they needed something that did not lose the target the moment the water closed over it. That was how the project began, not in a torpedo squadron, not on a destroyer, in laboratories. Harvard's Underwater Sound Lab, Bell Telephone Laboratories, Navy officers, civilian engineers, physicists, radio men, people who understood sound, circuits, and control systems better than they understood warships. That was one of the strangest parts of the whole story. The weapon that would change the Atlantic was not built first by traditional weapons designers. It was built by men who knew how signals behaved, how microphones listened, and how machines might be taught to react without human hands guiding them every second. That made the first challenge obvious. The torpedo needed ears, real ones, not metaphorically. Literally, it had to hear a submarine underwater through all the noise that normally makes the ocean such a difficult battlefield. Its own motion, the wash of water around its body, waves, current, random background sound. If it could not separate the propeller noise of a U-boat from the chaos around it, the whole project died before it ever reached production. So they gave it hydrophones, 4 of them, mounted around the body so the weapon could compare sound strength from different directions. If the signal was louder on one side, it turned that way. If it shifted, the torpedo shifted with it. That was the breakthrough. The weapon did not need to see the submarine. It only needed to keep hearing where the propellers were strongest and correct its course accordingly. In theory, that turned underwater movement into a trail the target could not stop leaving behind as long as it stayed submerged and running. But ears alone were not enough. The torpedo also needed a brain, not a human one, a small, fast, mechanical decision-maker that could take acoustic signals and convert them into steering corrections in real time. Bell Labs built that part using vacuum tube logic derived from radio and telephone technology. The system was simple in principle and radical in effect. Stronger sound on the left meant turn left. Stronger sound on the right meant turn right. Keep correcting. Keep closing. Keep spiraling inward until sound and target became the same point. What had been theoretical acoustic homing for years was now becoming a practical kill chain. Then came the next problem: speed. A torpedo built to chase a submerged submarine did not need fleet torpedo speed, but it did need enough. Too slow and the U-boat could slip away. Too loud and the torpedo would drown out the very sound it needed to follow. The answer was awkward but effective. A modest electric motor powered by battery, driving the weapon at about 12 knots. Slow by torpedo standards, painfully slow on paper. But underwater, a U-boat's own limits made that enough. Submerged submarines were already slow, blind, and forced to conserve energy. If they stayed under, they could not outrun it. That was the hidden trap. On the surface, a U-boat was faster. Underwater, it was doomed by the very act of trying to hide. That was why this weapon mattered so much. It did not just improve anti-submarine warfare, it reversed it. The safest move in every experienced U-boat captain's playbook, crash dive and disappear, was about to become the condition that made him vulnerable. Once submerged, the boat's speed dropped, its sight vanished, and its propellers started broadcasting exactly the sound the torpedo had been built to chase. And that was exactly why secrecy became as important as engineering. If the Germans learned what the weapon really was, they would start adapting. They might change tactics. They might surface when possible. They might search for acoustic countermeasures. They might at least understand that the old assumptions no longer held. The Allies could not allow that. They needed the first operational months to belong entirely to surprise. So they hid the weapon in plain language. Officially, it was not treated as a torpedo at all. It was called the Mark 24 mine. That name did 2 jobs at once. It kept the project away from the normal torpedo bureaucracy, which was already buried under other failures and delays, and it concealed the weapon's true nature from anyone not specifically cleared to know it. Everyone close to the program understood what it really was, but on paper, in reports, and in operational language, the lie remained. A mine sounded passive, ordinary, defensive. This weapon was none of those things. It hunted. The secrecy around it was extreme. Crews were forbidden from discussing it casually. After-action paperwork referred to the Mark 24 mine, not a homing torpedo. The fewer people who knew, the better. Because once the first U-boats started dying, the Germans were going to search for an explanation. The Allies needed them searching in the wrong direction. By early 1943, the weapon was finally reaching operational squadrons. That timing mattered. The Atlantic battle was approaching crisis. U-boats were still striking hard, but Allied long-range aircraft were now pushing deeper into the ocean than before. The air gap was closing. For the first time, submarines far out in the Atlantic were being found by aircraft that now carried a weapon built specifically for the moment after the dive. The geometry of the fight had changed. The aircraft only had to force the submarine under. Then the Mark 24 could do the rest. And somewhere in the North Atlantic, the first U-boat crew to hear aircraft overhead had no idea that the splash they could not see clearly was not the beginning of another failed depth charge attack. It was the start of a hunt, and the men inside the U-boat had no idea they were already inside it. That was what made the new weapon so dangerous. A depth charge attack announces itself. Explosions roll through the water. The crew counts the blasts, listens to the pattern, and tries to judge whether the danger is moving closer or fading away. Even when the attack is accurate, it has a kind of brutal logic to it. You know what is happening. You know what is trying to kill you. This was different. The Mark 24 did not need the crew below to understand it. It only needed them to keep moving. That was the trap built into the weapon's design. The aircraft drove the submarine under. The submarine's propellers kept turning as it descended and turned away. And those propellers were exactly what the weapon had been built to follow. The more the U-boat behaved like an experienced U-boat under attack, the more clearly it revealed itself to the torpedo waiting in the water. That was the reversal the Germans never saw coming. The correct defensive move had become the thing that killed them. The first combat proof came at exactly the right moment. May 1943 was already turning into a disaster for the German submarine arm. Allied air coverage was reaching farther into the Atlantic, convoy protection was improving, and U-boats were suddenly being found in waters that had once felt safe. But finding them was only half the battle. The real question was whether the new weapon could do under combat pressure what it had done in tests. On May 12, 1943, John Wright got his answer. He sighted U-456 on the surface. The submarine crash dived. Wright dropped the Mark 24 into the water near the swirl where the boat had disappeared. That was the key point. He was no longer trying to guess perfectly where a blind depth charge pattern should go. He was dropping a hunter into the submarine's escape path. The weapon entered the water, picked up the sound of the U-boat's propellers, and closed. The damage to U-456 was so severe that later attacks finished it. The first operational success had arrived. 2 days later came another kill. This time it was an American Catalina crew operating out of Iceland. Lieutenant Junior Grade Philip Baden launched a Mark 24 against U-640 in the North Atlantic. Again the submarine dived. Again the weapon followed it. Again the result was lethal. At that point the pattern was becoming harder to dismiss as luck. The secret weapon was doing in combat exactly what it had been designed to do in theory, turning a diving submarine into a trackable target instead of a disappearing one. That was when the whole Atlantic equation began to shift, not by magic, by pressure. The Germans had built years of confidence around the idea that a submarine which got below the surface quickly enough could usually survive the aircraft's attack. That confidence shaped tactics, timing, and aggression. Once the Mark 24 entered service, that confidence started dying without the Germans even knowing why. Submarine commanders reported aircraft overhead. A normal attack, a dive that should have saved them. Then a later underwater explosion that did not fit the expected pattern. No visible wake, no obvious explanation, no clear warning, just impact. That confusion mattered almost as much as the sinkings. An enemy can adapt to a weapon he understands. He struggles against one he misreads. German countermeasures were built around depth charges and active sonar. Some were designed to confuse sonar returns. Some were meant to mask the boat's position from surface escorts. None of that solved the real problem here, because the Mark 24 was not pinging for echoes. It was listening. Bubble decoys and surface ship countermeasures addressed the wrong threat. The Allies had quietly changed the type of attack, while the Germans were still defending against the old one. That was why the secrecy around the name mattered so much. If the Germans had understood early that the mine was really an air-dropped acoustic torpedo, they might have changed doctrine faster. They might have explored noise countermeasures, surfaced escapes, or tactical adjustments specific to passive acoustic homing. Instead, they were left trying to explain depths that sounded like delayed depth charge effects, magnetic detection, or some other invisible trick. The lie in the name protected the truth in the water. Mine concealed the fact that this was not a passive device waiting to be hit. It was an active hunter that entered the sea and made its own decisions from there. and the kills kept coming. During what the Germans would remember as Black May, submarine losses rose to catastrophic levels. The Mark 24 was not the only reason. Longer-range aircraft, escort carriers, improved radar, and better convoy tactics all mattered, but the new weapon closed the final gap in anti-submarine warfare. Before it, a diving U-boat often escaped the most dangerous second of the attack. After it, the dive became the beginning of the most dangerous second. That change went deeper than statistics. It altered the psychology of the fight. Aircraft crews learned to welcome the crash dive. Let it go under. Let it think it has escaped. Then drop the Mark 24 and let the weapon do the work. That inversion was devastating. For years, submerging had been survival. Now it was the trigger for pursuit. Underwater, the U-boat was slower, blinder, and louder in the one way that mattered to the new torpedo. It could no longer count on concealment alone. The ocean had stopped hiding it from the most dangerous part of the attack. That was the true legacy of the weapon. It did not merely improve anti-submarine warfare. It redefined the moment when the submarine ceased to be safest. By the end of the war, the record was extraordinary. The Mark 24 had been launched in combat enough times to prove that the concept was not a laboratory trick, but a battlefield system. The broader tally credited it with 37 confirmed submarine kills and significant damage to many more. That was not a marginal result for a secret weapon introduced in the last 2 years of the war. It represented a substantial share of all submarines destroyed from the air, and it did so while staying hidden behind a false label the enemy never properly decoded. And that is why the title matters. They called it Mine to conceal its secret, not because the name fit, because the truth was too dangerous to reveal. It was not a mine. It was the first practical fire-and-forget anti-submarine weapon, a torpedo that could hear a diving boat, follow the sound of its screws, and strike after the enemy thought the attack had already failed. It did not miss because it was lucky. It did not become legendary because it was dramatic. It mattered because it solved the exact problem that had kept the Atlantic so deadly. Submarines could dive, and ordinary weapons went blind. The Mark 24 did not go blind. It kept listening. That was the lesson. The real breakthrough in the Atlantic was not a bitter explosion. It was a weapon that could think just enough to keep hunting after the target vanished, and by the time the Germans understood that something had changed beneath them, 37 submarines had already paid for the secret they were never allowed to hear named correctly.